It was one of those days that started like any other, but destiny had something very different planned. The forest road was quiet, the kind of place where only the sound of birds and the rustling of leaves could be heard. A wealthy man, someone who had everything the world could offer: cars, businesses, fame, was driving through that very road. He wasn't used to being alone in places like this. His world was usually filled with noise, meetings, and luxury. But for reasons only he knew, he had chosen to take this unusual path through the forest. Maybe he wanted some peace. Maybe he just wanted to escape the pressure of his life. Or maybe it was just chance. As he drove further into the forest, the path grew narrower, the trees thicker, and the silence deeper. Then, without warning, his car hit something hard, jolted, and skidded off the road. The vehicle crashed against the side of a slope, leaving the man shaken and injured. The door was jammed, and his phone had no signal. For the first time in a long while, his money, power, and influence meant nothing. He was alone in a place where none of those things could save him. The pain in his leg grew stronger, and panic began to set in. He shouted, hoping someone might hear, but only the echo of his own voice came back to him. Minutes felt like hours. He thought of his family, his businesses, the world he had built with his wealth, and for a moment, he wondered if this forest would be the last thing he would ever see. Far away, in a small town not too distant from the forest, two young boys were spending their afternoon exploring. Their family didn't have much, but they had each other and the freedom to roam. The forest was like a playground to them. They loved collecting firewood, chasing squirrels, and racing each other between trees. On that particular day, their curiosity led them deeper than they usually went. It was as if fate itself was guiding their steps. One of the boys suddenly stopped. "Did you hear that?" he whispered. The other looked around, puzzled. They listened carefully, and faintly, somewhere between the tall trees, came a weak cry for help. At first, they thought they were imagining it. But when the sound came again, they knew someone was in trouble. Without wasting time, they ran towards the direction of the voice. Their hearts raced with a mixture of fear and courage. They were just kids, but something inside told them this was serious. As they got closer, they saw a car, dented and half off the road, smoke rising lightly from the hood. And inside, slumped against the seat, was a man. His suit was torn, his face pale, and his leg looked badly hurt. The boys froze for a second. This wasn't something they had ever seen before. But the sight of the injured man pushed them into action. They rushed to the car, pulling at the handle, trying to open the door. It took all their strength, but finally, the door creaked open. The billionaire looked at them with tired eyes, surprised that his rescuers were two young boys who had stumbled upon him by chance. He tried to speak, but his voice cracked. "Please, help." The boys didn't ask who he was or why he was there. None of that mattered. They just knew he needed them. One of them quickly untied the rope they had brought to carry wood and used it to support the man's injured leg. The other ran to fetch water from a nearby stream and offered it to him. Carefully holding it so he could sip. Step by step, they pulled him out of the car. It wasn't easy. He was heavy and they were small, but together they managed. They laid him under the shade of a large tree, away from the wrecked car. The man looked at them with gratitude shining in his eyes. For someone who lived in a world of business suits and luxury boardrooms, this moment felt completely unreal. He was alive because two young boys, who had nothing to gain, had chosen to help him. Time passed slowly. The boys stayed with him, not leaving his side. They tried to keep him talking so he wouldn't faint. They even shared the small snacks they had carried with them. In those moments, the barrier between wealth and poverty, between power and simplicity, completely disappeared. There was just a man fighting to stay alive and two children determined to keep him safe. The sun began to set, and the forest grew cooler. The man felt weak, but there was a strange comfort in the presence of the boys. He realized that sometimes, Life's greatest saviors come from the most unexpected places. And as night slowly approached, one thought kept running through his mind. These boys had just given him a chance to live again. Little did they know, this meeting in the forest was only the beginning of a story that would soon change all of their lives. Forever, the forest air was still, carrying only the chirping of crickets as the evening crept in. The two boys sat on the ground near the injured man, their eyes filled with worry but also determination. They were young, yet something about the situation had awakened a strength inside them. They understood that this man's life depended on their courage, and they weren't going to walk away. The billionaire tried to keep himself steady. His leg throbbed with sharp pain, and his head still felt heavy from the crash. Every now and then, he would look at the boys, studying their faces. They weren't afraid to get their hands dirty. They weren't backing off, even though they had no idea who he was. It surprised him. All his life, people had helped him because of his wealth, his influence, or what they could gain from him. But here, lying under the branches of a tall tree, he realized these boys didn't even know his name. They were helping because they cared. One of the boys looked at him closely and said softly, "Don't worry, sir, we won't leave you alone." The man felt a lump in his throat. Those words touched him more than he expected. They worked together to make him as comfortable as possible. Using their small bag and some cloth, they created a makeshift pillow to rest his head. The rope tied around his leg was tightened carefully to slow the bleeding. The boys had no medical training, but their instincts and quick thinking gave him the strength to hold on. Every now and then, the billionaire closed his eyes, drifting in and out of consciousness. But the sound of the boys' voices kept pulling him back. They talked to him, asked him if he was thirsty, asked if he could still feel his toes. Their chatter, innocent yet brave, kept the fear away from his mind. The hours stretched long, and the forest began to darken. The boys knew they had to stay calm. "We can't leave him," one whispered. "If we go, he might not make it." The other nodded in agreement. They had families waiting for them at home, but in their hearts, they knew this man's need was greater. To keep his spirits alive, they even began to tell him little stories. They spoke about their school, about how they sometimes played soccer with an old ball in the dusty streets, and how their mother always scolded them for coming home late. The billionaire listened quietly, almost forgetting his pain for moments at a time. It was strange. He had been in boardrooms filled with the world's most powerful people, but this simple conversation with two boys felt more real, more genuine than anything else he had known. At one point, one of the boys handed him a piece of bread they had carried. "Eat this, it will help you," he said. The man hesitated, knowing that this small meal was probably all they had for themselves. But their eyes insisted, and so he took a bite. He chewed slowly, and tears almost came to his eyes. It wasn't about the bread, it was about the kindness behind it. The night grew colder, and the forest turned silent again. The boys gathered dry leaves and wood to make a small fire, their little hands working quickly. Flames flickered to life, casting a warm glow on their tired faces. The man felt his body relax a little in the heat. He was still in pain, but he felt less alone. As the fire burned, he asked them, his voice weak but steady, "Why did you stop to help me? You could have run home instead." One of the boys shrugged and said simply, "Because you needed us." That answer echoed in his heart. It wasn't complicated. It wasn't about recognition or reward. It was pure humanity. And in that moment, the billionaire realized something powerful. True kindness expects nothing in return. The night stretched on, and with every passing hour, the boys kept watch, taking turns to check on him. They fought their sleepiness, determined not to let him slip away. He was a stranger, yet they treated him as if he was family. The man lay there, staring at the star-filled sky, and for the first time in years, he thought about his life in a different way. He thought about the money that couldn't save him today, about the luxurious life that suddenly felt so fragile. And then he thought about the boy's 2 children, who had nothing yet were giving everything they could to protect him. By the time the first light of dawn touched the forest, he was still alive because of them. His pain hadn't gone away, but his hope had grown stronger. And deep inside, he made himself a silent promise. If he survived this, he would never forget these boys. What none of them knew was that this single night in the forest was just the beginning. The billionaire's life would be saved, but the boys' lives were about to be changed forever in ways they couldn't even imagine. The first rays of sunlight filtered through the tall trees, casting golden streaks across the forest floor. The boys, tired but proud, looked at the man resting under the shade. He was still weak, but his eyes opened more steadily now. They had made it through the night. That itself felt like a victory. The billionaire tried to sit up, groaning as the pain shot through his leg. One of the boys quickly helped support him. "Don't move too much, sir," he said gently. The other offered him water again. Despite their young age, they showed remarkable care. It was as if they had suddenly taken on the roles of protectors, far beyond their years. The man nodded gratefully. "You two saved my life," he whispered. His voice cracked, not just from weakness but from emotion. "I don't even know your names." The boys exchanged a quick look, a little shy. They told him their names softly, almost embarrassed by the attention. But the billionaire repeated them carefully, as if etching them into his memory. For him, those names had become more precious than all the signatures on his $1,000,000 contracts. Now that the sun was up, the boys knew they had to find a way to get help. The man's injuries were too serious to ignore. One of them decided to climb a small hill nearby, hoping to catch a signal on the man's broken phone. It took several tries, but finally, a single bar appeared on the screen. He dialed the emergency number, his small fingers trembling. The call went through. Within a couple of hours, the distant sound of sirens echoed through the forest. The boys felt relief wash over them as vehicles and rescue workers finally arrived. Paramedics rushed to the scene, carefully lifting the billionaire onto a stretcher. They checked his vitals, secured his leg, and began preparing him for the hospital. As they worked, the billionaire kept his gaze fixed on the 2 boys. Even in his pain, he kept asking the medics to wait, to let him speak. Finally, before they carried him away, he reached out his hand. The boys stepped closer. His grip was weak but filled with emotion. "You didn't just help me," he said slowly, his eyes misty. "You gave me life again. I will never forget this." The boys didn't know how to respond. They weren't used to such words, especially from a man who clearly lived in a world so different from theirs. They simply nodded, their innocence shining through. For them, it was enough to know that he was safe. The paramedics carefully placed him into the ambulance. The sirens roared, and in a few moments, the vehicle disappeared down the forest road. The boys stood there in silence, watching the dust settle. Their clothes were dirty, their eyes tired, but their hearts were full. They turned back toward their small town, ready to return to their simple lives. What they didn't realize was that their lives had already changed forever. Days passed. The memory of that night stayed with the boys, though they didn't speak much about it. To them, it had been the right thing to do, nothing more. They went back to their chores, their school, and their games in the dusty streets. Life moved on, at least on the surface, but far away. In a private hospital suite, the billionaire thought about nothing else. He lay in bed, recovering from his injuries, but his mind replayed the night again and again, the crash, the pain, and most of all, the 2 small faces that refused to leave his side. Doctors came and went. Assistants brought him news of his businesses, but none of it mattered. His empire could wait. For once, he wasn't thinking about profits or deals. He was thinking about 2 boys who had shown him a kind of wealth he had never known before. He asked his team to find them. "I need their address, their family, everything," he said firmly. His assistants were surprised. Normally, their boss gave orders about million-dollar investments, not about tracking down two children from a small town. But this time, his tone left no room for doubt. Meanwhile, in the boys' neighborhood, life was quiet and ordinary. Their family was just trying to make ends meet. The boys never expected to hear from the man again. To them, he was gone, carried away by flashing lights and sirens into a world that didn't belong to them. But fate had other plans. One evening, as the sun began to dip and families prepared their simple dinners, the quiet street suddenly filled with the deep hum of engines. Neighbors peeked out of their windows, surprised. A long, shiny black SUV slowly rolled into the neighborhood, its polished body catching the last rays of light. It was unlike any vehicle the families there had ever seen. The boys, sitting on their porch, froze. The SUV came to a stop right in front of their home. The door opened, and out stepped men in sharp suits. And then, behind them, came the man they had once pulled from the wreckage of a broken car in the forest. He was standing tall now, dressed in a crisp suit, his face no longer pale but full of life. But more than that, there was a softness in his eyes, a gratitude that words could hardly capture. The neighborhood fell silent. Everyone was watching. Nobody could guess what was about to happen, and in that moment, the boys realized this was not the end of the story. This was only the beginning of something far bigger than they had ever imagined. The street had never been so quiet. Children who had been playing with makeshift toys stopped mid-game, their eyes fixed on the sleek black SUV parked outside the small house. Neighbors leaned against their doors, whispering to each other, their curiosity growing by the second. For a neighborhood used to bicycles and old pickup trucks, the sudden appearance of such a luxury vehicle felt almost unreal. The boys sat frozen on their porch. Their hearts raced. They recognized the man the moment he stepped out, even though he looked very different from the last time they had seen him. Gone was the pale, injured figure lying helpless in the forest. Standing before them now was a tall man in a finely pressed suit, his hair neatly styled, his step strong and confident. Yet, despite his appearance, there was something soft in his eyes, something humble. The billionaire slowly walked toward the porch. Every step he took was measured, filled with purpose. The boy's mother, who had just come to the door to see what the commotion was, stood speechless. She wiped her hands nervously on her apron, unsure of what to say. Their father, tired from a long day's work, stepped out behind her, equally puzzled. When the man finally reached the porch, he paused. For a moment, no one spoke. The only sounds were the chirping of evening crickets and the murmurs of neighbors gathered around. Then the billionaire broke the silence. "I came here," he said softly, "because I needed to see my heroes again." The words stunned everyone. The boys looked at each other, unsure if they had heard correctly. Heroes? They had never been called that before. They had only done what felt right, help someone in need. But hearing it from him, in front of everyone, made their young hearts swell with pride. The billionaire turned to their parents. His voice grew heavy with emotion. "Your son saved my life. When I was at my weakest, when all my wealth meant nothing, they stood by me. I would not be alive today if it weren't for them." The parents were taken aback. Their eyes widened and their hands trembled. They had raised their children to be kind, but they had no idea that such an act of bravery would one day bring someone like this to their doorstep. Tears welled up in their mother's eyes while their father stood tall, pride filling his chest. The neighbors gasped in disbelief. Whispers spread quickly, so the rumors were true. The mysterious man rescued in the forest had been none other than a billionaire, and these two boys had been the ones to save him. The billionaire motioned to the suited men waiting by the SUV. One of them opened the back door, and a large box was carefully carried out. It was polished wood, with golden edges, and it looked out of place in the modest street. The man lifted the lid himself and revealed neatly stacked envelopes, documents, and something even more surprising, brand new school supplies. laptops, and neatly folded clothes. He turned back to the family. "This is only the beginning," he said firmly. "Your children showed me what true courage looks like. I want to make sure they have every opportunity they deserve. Education, safety, and a future that matches the greatness of their hearts." The boys stared wide-eyed at the gifts. They had never seen anything like it. Their parents tried to protest, their father shaking his head. "Sir, we didn't ask for this. They only did what was right." The billionaire smiled gently. "I know, and that's exactly why they deserve it. Because they didn't do it for money, or fame, or recognition. They did it because they cared." He stepped closer to the boys, crouching down so that his eyes met theirs. His voice softened. "That night, when I thought I might not make it, I realized something important. Money can buy many things, but it cannot buy kindness. It cannot buy courage. You gave me both, without hesitation. And I will spend the rest of my life making sure your kindness does not go unnoticed." The boys didn't know how to respond. Their cheeks turned red, and they shuffled awkwardly, still overwhelmed by the attention. One of them whispered, "We're just glad you're okay." Those simple words struck the billionaire more deeply than anything else. He blinked back tears, then placed a hand gently on each of their shoulders. "I am okay because of you." By now, the entire neighborhood had gathered around, their faces lit with awe and amazement. Some clapped quietly, others just stood in silence, witnessing a moment they knew they would talk about for years to come. The billionaire straightened up, his gaze sweeping across the crowd. "These boys are proof that heroes can come from anywhere. They didn't wear capes, they didn't have special powers, but they saved a life, mine." The crowd erupted into applause, their voices echoing through the street. The boys' parents held each other tightly, tears of pride rolling down their cheeks. And the boys, standing in the center of it all, felt a warmth in their hearts they couldn't explain. As the applause faded, the billionaire promised to return soon. "This is only the start," he said with conviction. "I will be back." And as he climbed back into the SUV, the boys realized something. The story that began in the quiet of the forest was far from over. The next chapter of their lives had just begun. The days after the billionaire's visit felt like a dream to the boys and their family. Their modest home, once just another small house in the neighborhood, became the center of attention. Neighbors often stopped by, some still in disbelief, others simply wanting to congratulate the family. The boys tried to return to their normal lives, helping with chores, going to school, playing in the dusty streets. But deep down, they knew things had already changed. One evening, not long after the first visit, the sound of engines filled the street again. This time, it wasn't just one SUV, it was a small convoy. The neighborhood gathered quickly, children running alongside the shiny vehicles, adults whispering as the cars came to a stop. The billionaire stepped out once more, but this time he wasn't empty-handed. Behind him, his team carried boxes, bags, and even furniture. The sight left everyone stunned. He walked up to the boys' parents with a warm smile. "I told you I would be back," he said. Before anyone could respond, his team began unloading the gifts. New clothes, enough for the whole family. Fresh groceries, something the family had often struggled to afford. A brand new dining table to replace the old wooden one that had been passed down for years. But the most important gift was yet to come. The billionaire pulled out a folder and handed it to the boy's father. "Inside," he explained, "are documents ensuring full scholarships for both of your sons. They will have access to the best schools and universities. Their education will be completely taken care of." The father's hands trembled as he opened the folder. Tears filled his eyes as he looked at the papers, proof that his son's future was secure. The mother covered her mouth, unable to hold back her sobs of joy. The billionaire then crouched down to face the boys. His voice was steady, but his eyes glistened. "This is not charity," he told them. "This is gratitude. You gave me life when I thought I might lose it. And now, I want to give you the chance to live the life you deserve." The boys listened quietly, their young hearts overwhelmed by the weight of his words. They had never thought about universities or about opportunities far beyond their small town. For them, the future had always been uncertain, shaped by limits they couldn't control. But now, doors were opening, doors they had never even imagined existed. The billionaire wasn't done. He turned to the parents again. "I also want to support your family. A new home is being arranged, one that will give your children space to grow, study, and dream without worry." Gasps filled the crowd. The neighbors clapped, some even crying, as the news spread. It felt like the entire community had been lifted by the moment. The boy's mother stepped forward, tears streaming down her face. "We don't know how to thank you," she whispered. The billionaire shook his head. "It is I who should thank you. You raised sons who showed me what true humanity looks like. That is something money can never buy." The boy's father, a man who rarely spoke much, placed his hand firmly on his son's shoulders. "We've always taught them to help others. We never thought it would one day save someone like you." The billionaire smiled softly. "It doesn't matter who we are, rich or poor, powerful or ordinary. In the end, we are all just people who need each other. Your sons reminded me of that." The moment hung in the air, powerful and unforgettable. The boys stood silently, but inside their hearts beat with pride and hope. As the convoy left later that night, the neighborhood buzzed with excitement. People couldn't stop talking about what they had witnessed. The boys became symbols of courage and kindness, their story spreading far beyond their small town. In the weeks that followed, the promises became reality. The boys received their new school uniforms, books, and laptops. Their home was upgraded into a comfortable house with electricity that didn't flicker and walls that didn't leak when it rained. Their parents, once burdened with constant worry, now felt a new peace they hadn't known in years. But perhaps the greatest change was not material. It was the way the boys carried themselves. They walked taller, not out of pride, but out of a sense of purpose. They realized their actions in the forest had not just saved a life, they had changed their own. The billionaire visited often, not as a distant benefactor but as a friend. He would sit with the family, share meals, and listen to the boys talk about their dreams. He made sure they knew he wasn't there to control their future, only to support it. Years later, people would still talk about that day in the forest. They would tell the story of two boys who had nothing but courage, who saved a man who had everything, and how that single act of kindness connected two worlds that could not have been more different. And in the hearts of those boys, now growing into young men, one truth remained: sometimes, the smallest act of kindness can create the biggest change. They hadn't saved the billionaire for recognition, or reward, or gifts. They had done it because it was the right thing to do. Yet, destiny had chosen to repay them in ways they never could have dreamed of. What began as a terrifying accident in a quiet forest became a story that inspired everyone who heard it, a story of kindness, courage, gratitude, and the beautiful way human lives can touch each other. And though many years would pass, one memory would always remain crystal clear in the billionaire's heart: the night he looked into the eyes of two boys who refused to leave him, and in doing so, gave him back his life.